Welcome into the newest episode of the Hoth Hangout podcast. We have so much to talk about. I think I normally say that, but this is perhaps the most we've ever had to talk about in any episode of the Hoth Hangout podcast. So much so, in fact, that this one is probably going to end up being split into two parts. The first part of which we're going to discuss and break down the latest Mandalorian episode, episode 7 of season 3, and then the second part covering everything that went down at Star Wars Celebration over last weekend, of which there was a lot of stuff. It's going to be a blast to cover it all. I am super, super excited. I was actually telling Joey that it's rare that like an episode is so good like the Mando one was this week, and I'm still so excited to talk about the other thing, probably even more so.
Right.
But yeah, like I said, we'll get to it. But before we hop into the Mando stuff, Joey, what's going on? How has your week been?
Pretty good. Just like you said, there's so much Star Wars stuff, so that's really what consumed my last weekend. And then the days after that, it was me recovering from all the things that we learned from this last weekend. So it's been a fun week. My Bulls won tonight also in the play-in
Saw
game.
that. Congrats.
Yeah, so now I think we face Miami, I think.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, so I'll be excited about that. But yeah, no, I'm excited to get back to our Hoth Hangout discussion. This is going to be a long one, folks. So I hope you got your popcorn and your drinks, because we're gonna go for a long ride today.
Yes, it's definitely gonna be on the longer side, but we love that, honestly. In fact, those of you that have been listening for a while, you may remember that some of our very first original podcasts were very oftentimes, almost always, like an hour and a half long. So maybe it's gonna be another one of the back to the good old days sort of podcasts. Is this episode 30? This might maybe it's 29.
Might be 29.
We're coming up on episode 30. Which also I should mention another thank you once again for recently putting us over that 100 subscriber mark on the Hoth Hangout YouTube channel. If you're watching the video version of the podcast and you're not subscribed to the Hoth Hangout YouTube channel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We would really appreciate it. And a special thank you to those of you listening on Apple and Spotify or wherever you may get your podcasts. Okay, where to start with episode 7? I think maybe we'll just jump in with an overview or perhaps an overall thought even beforehand. I think it's safe to say, at least I felt this way. I'm curious how you felt about it. I think it's safe to say that this was probably the best episode of this season. This was, in fact, the first time this season that during the show, I felt this almost inescapable sense of excitement while I was watching, where I was just almost overjoyed with all the stuff they were hitting us with. I was like, "Oh, that's awesome! Oh, that's gonna tie into Ahsoka, yes. Or in some way, it's like information we hadn't got before, and it just felt like the most complete episode of this season, which leaves you wondering, like, why maybe it wasn't a little bit earlier in the season too, especially on the back of episode 6, which wasn't really a poorly made episode, but in terms of relevance to the show, didn't do a whole lot, I think, for most people. Again, not to say it was bad, but clearly not as impactful and definitely not as exciting as episode 7. So overall, I would just say my feelings towards it as I was watching it was 11 out of 10. And we can grade the episode a little bit later on, but what were your thoughts? Or what were your biggest takeaways?
Very similar. I mean, this is Star Wars. This this episode was everything you wanted from all different angles. Like you said, we are waiting for we have been waiting for these tie-ins. We got the I'll jump into it a little bit here, but we got the name Thrawn was explicitly said here.
Mm-hmm.
We've got some tie-ins to some of the sequel trilogy stuff. We saw Praetorian Guards. We saw Brendel Hux, who I believe is the father of
Yes.
the Hux character that's in the I forget the what I forget what his actual first name was,
It's
but
like a very formal British sounding name.
yes, yes,
I'll
yes.
look it up.
Yeah, so we saw him as well. Um, yeah, so and just seeing the Mandalorians and that the animosity towards each other, the kind of the old school Mandalorians and the new non-helmeted or Mandalorians, and now we've got these Mandalorians that were still kind of on Mandalore chilling, um, that we didn't know were there. So we've got those guys. Those guys are in bad shape, by the way. I don't know how they've survived as long as they have. So props to them. I think they might be the most Mandalorians out there because they have been there the entire time. So I'm gonna draw the line and say that about those remaining people that were there.
Yeah, it's a fair point. And actually in an interesting way, it almost ties into the show episode a little bit. Just because you said like they're the most Mandalorian of the Mandalorians. I would presume obviously because they've been on the planet of Mandalore. But then I guess that begs the question, well, what makes someone a Mandalorian?
Hmm.
Because if you're talking about like religious zealousness, then like the Children of the Watch would be like the most Mandalorian. You know what I mean? But
Right.
if you're talking about maybe I don't know what the other faction of Mandalorians would subscribe to, perhaps other than the dark saber stuff and whatnot. But anyways, it begs the question like of what does make someone a real Mandalorian.
I mean, and not to go into too deep with like politics and religion, but it's a lot like religion, where you have this main religion, and then you've got people that kind of cherry pick on like, oh, I like that piece, so I like that piece,
Sure,
so
yeah,
I'm a Mandalorian because of this, and like, no, I'm a Mandalorian because, so it kind of
right,
just reminds me of that.
yeah, yeah, definitely. That's a good point. Um, and that also brings up another thought. First of all, one of the Mandalorians they found on the planet, I saw this somewhere, was that he is the actor. Have you ever seen Breaking Bad?
Mm-hmm.
He is the actor that plays. I think his name is Pete. He's the actor that plays
Oh,
Pete. I
okay.
think
I'd have
in
to look
Breaking
back at that. I
Bad.
don't remember. Yeah.
But anyways, so and when I first saw him, do you know do you know who I thought it was?
Who?
I thought it was Christian Bale, and then
Oh, oh,
and then they zoom in on his face a little bit. I was like, oh, that's definitely not
that's that
Christian
Christian
Bale.
Bale. Wow.
Yeah.
I
Uh,
mean, just a quick point: the fact that they brought in Jack Black and Lizzo last week, I wouldn't be surprised if they would throw a Christian Bale in the middle of the second to last episode of the
if
Mandalorian.
if we were to get Christian Bale in Star Wars, maybe as like a villain role, ooh, I
Oh,
could I could I could go with that. Did you ever see the fourth Thor movie, Love and Thunder?
yes, yes, he was very good in it. I
Best
didn't even recognize him.
best part of that movie is Christian Bale. Um, anyways, the other thing that we did finally see in this episode, Moff Gideon, which it was interesting, the transition from kind of thinking he might still be around to like thinking, okay, he's escaped, to seeing him. I thought they did it okay. It was almost weird though, because I almost expected his reveal to be in the last episode of the season. And then it just kind of happened at the beginning of this episode when what's her name? Elia, I still don't know how to pronounce her name. Was talking to him on the comm, which by the way was like another really cool Coruscant scene. Anything on Coruscant is so
Mm.
cool. The way that it takes a kind of those vibes from Blade Runner almost a little bit.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
But so that also sort of ties in the scene from the end of episode 5, I want to say. Was it 5 or 4 where the craft that was carrying Gideon, uh the pilot that discovered it was like, these are Mandalorian marks,
Right.
it looked like, which now that we know these new era, this new phase of troopers is using like Beskar armor, and so it's presumed, at least my understanding at the end of the
Right.
episode, is that they're the ones that broke Gideon
Which
out.
makes more sense
Yes, yeah,
than any of the Mandalorian factions to be breaking him out.
right,
I mean,
right.
we did toy with the idea that maybe the Axe Wolves Casca Reeves faction may have been bought out in order to, help Gideon escape.
Hmm.
But I think, yeah, I think it's safe to say that this new this new group of are they Death Troopers?
He calls them no. What does he call? Does he call them Death Troopers? He calls them a very specific name,
Mm-hmm.
and Shock?
Or
No,
Dark
not Dark
Troopers.
Trooper.
Dark Troopers. Dark Troopers.
Going through all the
The,
list of trooper names
yeah,
in my
Death Troopers. Yeah, Death Troopers were from Rogue One. Yeah,
yeah,
Dark Troopers. Yes.
Dark Troopers. Yes. Um. So yeah, that was a cool, installment to the episode because now that kind of gives something else to contend with moving forward, and it's gonna make the troopers a little more of a force to contend with. I think moving forward in
Mm-hmm.
the show as well. Now they're not just like the guys who can't hit anything, but now they're the guys who can also like take bullets,
Right.
or blaster shots, I guess, if we want to be technical.
That fight with the Mandalorians against the Dark Troopers was awesome, but also a little bit comical
Yeah,
because
I
it
was
was
like,
like
how
you
many
guys
blaster shots does it take to down someone if everyone's wearing Beskar?
exactly. This is going to be the longest fight scene in Star Wars. That's kind of what I was waiting for.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, but then Bo-Katan um found a way to get some of the vulnerable areas,
Which,
getting under the armor and things like that.
which was kind of some of the more not brutal
Oh, no,
parts,
it was,
but
yeah. Yeah.
comparatively for Disney Star Wars, they're like taking these knives or blasters and like, going for the vital parts. You're like, oh gosh, okay.
Right.
Something I guess before we get to the fight scene, which far and away, if not the best fight scene of the show, definitely the best fight scene of the season, in my opinion, in this episode. Something that happens a little bit earlier on in the episode with Gideon, as soon as he gets off the comm with Elia, as he walks through, first, before he meets with this group of people known as the Shadow Council,
Cool
which
name.
is, yes, very cool name, largely based off of I think the Heir to the Jedi books written by Timothy Zahn. Um, in fact, well, and before I get to that, what did you think of the scene with him walking to the Shadow Council where he's going through sort of what looks like these clone chambers?
Oh yeah.
And I have another thought, but go ahead and what
I
do you
mean,
think? Because I want to tie it in too.
I didn't know. I mean, we know that they are trying to get the cloning technology for Palpatine, for the Emperor.
Mhm.
Snoke in there, I don't know, but is Kino Loy in there? Maybe. But no, yeah, I thought it was very cool. We're we're get we're getting all of this now. We're getting all the stuff that you and I had talked about for 30 episodes of this podcast, where we want all of this to tie into other pieces of Star Wars. And I mean, and you kind of alluded to it earlier. It sounds like they're bringing some things from Legends, what's considered
A
Legends
lot of
from the
stuff.
EU,
Yeah.
and I think that's great. I think they're listening to their audience. Where I'm sure there were a lot of people who were very very upset when they essentially decanonized that entire series, or that entire section of Star Wars, but now to find ways to bring it back in here and there, and I believe some stuff from Celebration also was kind of mentioned in that same vein. So yeah, I thought it was very cool just how he walked through there, and part of me is like, what? How are we here? Isn't everything from the Empire gone? It looked like it was like an Imperial ship, and so
Mhm.
it was very cool.
Yeah. The other thing with the Shadow Council is it felt very much like the tie-in for ushering in the era of Thrawn in Disney Star Wars, if you will, because we're definitely going to be seeing him in Ahsoka, and I would hope it's my hope at least that next week's episode is going to somewhat be a tie-in to the Ahsoka show, and that I would be thrilled if Thrawn is in the entire episode next week. I think it's more than likely that he's in the last 5 seconds, where it's, the back of his head or, something to
Right.
that effect. Also worth noting, one of the people on the Shadow Council is in Heir to the Empire. this Thrawn trilogy written by Timothy Zahn. Uh, this what was his name? Captain Pelion, I think is his
Mm-hmm.
name. Uh,
Peloton.
Peloton, yeah. Is that isn't that what it's? Do you ever watch the Tour de France?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that what the main group of people in a cycling
Oh, is that
race
what it's
is
called?
called?
Oh.
Yeah. Anyways, side note. Um, he is actually the right hand man to Thrawn in the novels,
Oh.
which is also something they borrowed from the books, because if you watch in the scene, it almost feels like everyone is kind of directing some of the Thrawn interrogating questions towards him specifically. Like when is he going to be more involved? When is he going to be a part of the Shadow Council meetings? And that's when Gideon is kind of like, well, maybe we need, a new leader, and all the other people are like, yeah, maybe, kind of, suggesting that he should be that leader, perhaps.
Right.
We also, also thought it was interesting, kind of shifting gears here, I guess. Well, actually, no, hold on, wait. I thought of another thing. I want to go back to the cloning.
Okay.
So, I think my biggest worry, first of all, and if you've listened to previous episodes of the podcast, you know this. We've talked about this a lot. I love exploring the cloning stuff with Bad Batch, now with Mando as well. Anytime it's discussed in Star Wars, I think it's really cool how they can dive into it and we learn a lot more about it. What I don't want cloning to be, and what my biggest worry is that the direction it's going, is that they're almost using cloning to over explain the sequels in a way where people will not look back on them in as badly of a light as perhaps they have to this point in time. Um, it just feels, and now they're putting Praetorian guards in there. Not that that's related to cloning, but I think they are making concerted efforts to try to incorporate sequel lore, um, but not overtly, as to maybe slightly shift the tone and the attitude towards the sequels. And maybe that was just kind of the way I saw things. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
that's not actually what they're trying to do. But the cloning stuff, at least with this episode of Mando, I was kind of like, I hope they don't like go that
Mm-hmm.
direction of like explaining
Like overcorrect.
Snoke. Like, yeah, I don't want the purpose of season 4 of Mandalorian, or one of the primary purposes of season 4 of Mandalorian, to be explaining Snoke. You know what I mean? Like, it's cool if it's an Easter egg in there. It's like, oh, that could be
Mm-hmm.
how he came about. But if we spend, time of a show where really it's not too concerned with cloning, I don't know. I'm kind of going on a tangent at this point, but that was something I was thinking about as well.
And in I believe in the Aftermath books, which I think those take place. Do they take place after or before Force Awakens, or after Return of Jedi? I can't remember, but there was already talk of cloning in there.
Mm-hmm.
In the Aftermath books, also some cloning mentioned in the Battlefront 2 video game. So I mean, this was just really the first time we saw it on the screen, where it's
Right.
a little bit. I mean, and obviously in Attack of the Clones, or the Clone Wars series, and so I think we were headed here. I think we were headed here. Um, the overall, the ending, and we could talk all day about the sequel, but the sequel trilogy, but maybe the ending isn't exactly what we want. I think, to your point, I think maybe they're trying to explain a little bit of it. I mean, I think that's where we're headed right now, and I don't necessarily see anything wrong with that. It just gives us a little bit more context into what has happened and what's going on going into the era that is considered, the sequel trilogy. So I'm all right with it. I think I'm okay with them. I'm not at a point where I'm thinking they're going to overcorrect and over-explain at this point. I could see the concern, but I think right now it's not too bad. But the one thing that we've always wanted was the interweavings of all these stories, all this lore, and I gotta admit, the Praetorian Guards kind of threw me a little bit, because I'm like, what? How, they were here already? Like that. That seems soon. That seems soon after um where we are right now after the fall of the Empire. So to have that here. So I mean, just a couple. I mean, because we're a few years after that, right? Isn't that where we are right now? A few years after Return Jedi, or something like this, right?
Yeah, between 6 and 7.
hmm So I think it's I, I I was shocked by that. I think I was shocked by that the most. So maybe they were kind of grasping there. Maybe that was a little bit of a reach for me anyway. But the cloning stuff, I think that's all where we need to be right now.
Yeah, it's definitely gonna be a key component, I think, of just Star Wars in general moving forward. One of the other more lighthearted parts of this episode that I thought was pretty fun was the transformation of IG-11 into IG-12 so that
Yes.
Grogu could more or less use him as this vehicle to and also to communicate too. I thought that was kind of funny. Uh, as much as this episode did really well in terms of like battle sequences and sort of these epic, intense moments, I thought it balanced it with this, comedic style with Grogu really well. It kind of does circling back to what we talked about maybe 2 weeks ago. Now Grogu has effectively just sort of become this comedic relief, which is fine, I guess. I don't have a problem with it. Uh, but it begs the question, like, what is his role going to be moving into season 4? But with IG-12, I thought it was actually really funny. And now, we've always sort of known that Grogu can understand people and can understand
hmm
Din Djarin, but just, lacks the ability to communicate, at least vocally, back with him. Now this sort of gives him a way to do that, which I thought was pretty funny. Although I will say at one point when he was spamming the yes button, I was like, okay, that's like 20 times in a row. You got to chill. Even I watching the episode was like, I'm kind of annoyed with Grogu right
Right.
now. But
Yeah.
that was fun. I'm glad they added that in there. I thought it provided some lightheartedness to the episode.
Being a father of a 9-year-old, yeah, that's about right. Like if the kid finds something that they like, they're going to continue using it. And for Grogu, it was the yes button there. So, yeah, I thought it was super cute. It was funny. Like you said, it had that balance just overall with the rest of the episode. And I mean, in all honesty, did we need it? I don't know if we needed it, but it was nice. It was a nice thing to have. Another interaction with Grogu and Zelen, the bad baby, no huggies or whatever it was. So, so I enjoyed that part. Again, a lighthearted scene, but I mean, functionally though, it helps because Grogu can get around a little bit quicker. You don't need to
hmm
have him in the transport. Um, and worry about that. I mean, even Din Djarin's like, okay, keep up with us, and which I gotta say, pretty dangerous mission that that
Yeah.
Grogu that he said Grogu, come on, um, when he was too young to he thought he was too young to use the IG-12, but he'll throw him in the middle of this really dangerous mission at the same point in days later.
Yeah. And also circling all the way back to episode 1 when we were kind of like that IG-11 scene seemed like really unnecessary. Now I guess it does make more sense because I think looking back on that scene is what made, IG-11 transforming into IG-12 in this part of this week's episode make more sense.
hmm
So it's stuff like that that oftentimes we as fans and viewers don't really see the point. Sometimes there is a plan like, 6, 7 weeks in the future where, it makes sense why they're showing you something here because they're going to like readdress it
Right.
here in the future. So I guess I appreciated that because it made me actually, you know, not have as much of a distaste for that scene in the first episode. I thought it made it make more sense. By the way, the title of this episode, that was something I wanted to talk about. Title of chapter 23 of The Mandalorian, episode 7 of season 3, is The Spies. Now, when we look at the episode, it's not directly apparent who the spies are. In fact, with you could really say there's only one overt spy in this episode,
Yeah.
that being Elia or Aaliyah. I'm just gonna keep saying both until I actually learn how to say her name. Uh, so it's specifically the plural word spies is the title of this episode, which makes you think there might be someone else working for this remnant of the Empire. I don't even know, or Shadow Council maybe is the name collectively that we should be referring to them as. If you had a hunch of who that might be, or do you think there's too much stock in the title of this episode being spies?
It's Din Djarin. Din Djarin is absolutely the spy the whole time.
Biggest plot twist in
Can you imagine?
TV history.
And I would have gotten away with it.
The protagonist of the show is actually the antagonist after all this
Can
time.
you imagine? That'd be so good. There's nobody that comes to mind other than there's no one that comes to mind. I mean, I was gonna say maybe there's no way a Moff Gideon is like playing on both sides. I don't feel like any of the Mandalorians are necessarily someone to look at. I mean, the only one that has always seemed shifty is Axe Wolves. Just kind of the way he's a little slimy.
I think because that's so on the nose, there's no way they would ever make him the spy. I had a thought. I was thinking, what if it was the pirate Mandalorians, the one they picked up?
Oh, yeah.
Because it's like Mandalore is this base. Now it's a base that this remnant of the Empire has been operating out of, right?
Mm-hmm.
And these Mandalorians have just been like around, avoiding them the whole time.
Right, yeah.
They've been like cruising on the planet's surface. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't put a whole lot of stock in that theory.
Yeah.
But
we need to talk about it though. I mean, when the pirates showed up and they're like, "Oh, we know where the forge is. We could tell you right there."
Right. That's what I'm saying.
I mean, that makes sense because if they were there, they would know where it would be. But you can't tell me in all this time since the purge that they hadn't gone down there. That they don't know, that's part of their planet. That's part of where they were.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they, to if we want to talk conspiracy theories, yeah, maybe they brought the Mandalorians to them. At some point,
I think it's a fair bet.
Yeah, they knew, and Moff Gideon says as much too, like, "Oh, we got all the Mandalorians here," or we got all in one spot, or "Thank you for bringing them all here," or something like that. And I can't remember if it was kind of a darker scene when like darker lit scene when they were all fighting. If any of those pirate Mandalorians were with them,
I think two of them were. I think.
Yeah.
Well, I think that how many there's only 3 total, wasn't there? Or was there?
I thought so. Yeah, because it seems like one
was sick or ill or injured
they had
or
to
something.
bring back.
Then the other 2 guys were there with them.
When the armor was bringing them back to the fleet, just the way that whole scene was shot, I'm like, this isn't gonna go well somewhere. Like I at that point I already know. I'm like, something's going to go sideways here, and I don't know if we're gonna see a TIE fighter come out of nowhere and just take him down. That's where I was. I was worried for the armorer if she was gonna make it out of this episode.
Yeah. Yeah, the armorer is another character who intrigues me a lot. Because it feels like the arc of her character has really shifted the past few episodes. Not that she's not important anymore, but it almost feels like she has relinquished ultimate authority to Bo at this point. And Bo is now operating more or less as the head of all the Mandalorians. I mean, there was even a scene in this episode where Din Djarin is like, "I serve you, Lady Grease," and then he has this thing about honor being the man reason, not birthright or blood or anything like that. So moving forward, I think I'm just more intrigued by the show than I was at the end of episode 6 for sure. I think I was just confused where we were headed. As oftentimes I feel like I have been in the past 2 years of watching Star Wars TV shows.
Right, yeah. This is their formula.
Yeah. Like, prior to this episode, it was like, I don't really understand what season 4 is going to be about. And now I feel like I have a pretty decent idea now that it's Gideon has revealed himself. There's this base on Mandalore. Clearly, this conflict is not going to all be resolved at the end of next week's episode. So, season 4 is probably going to be the fight for Mandalore, at least with Gideon versus Bo and the rest of the Mandalorians. Is it going to go into? There was mention in this episode at one point of even more Mandalorians being out there. These remnants of Death Watch, I think, is what it was specifically referenced as. Are we going to have episodes where all these remnants of Death Watch, the sons and daughters of the former Death Watch members, are kind of brought into the fold and recruited to the Mandalorian army? And then overall, not just Gideon and Bo, but how Thrawn and Ahsoka play into all of this. And I don't think much of that will come in. Definitely not this season. I'm just interested to see if that is a main focal point of season 4. But all that to say, I have a much more clear idea of the direction they're headed, whereas I was super confused before this week's episode where we were going.
To all that, I just have to say, who directed this episode?
Rick did. Rick had.
Rick did?
Well, he was the director. You mean Rick wrote the episode?
Oh, wrote the episode. Yeah.
Yeah, this was one of the 2 episodes this season that Dave wrote.
Yeah.
The other one was the Foundling episode, I think.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, this has Dave's fingerprints all over it.
All over it, yes. And thanks, Dave. Appreciate you. Yeah. We appreciate you in Star Wars. You and your hat. Yeah. We were both worried that this was gonna just be a flop of a season at some point. I mean, maybe not you, but I kind of worried a little bit. And if you look online, there are people who have kind of turned their nose to this season of Mandalorian, unfortunately, because it hasn't gone exactly the way that they would want. A lot of it goes around. This isn't a story about Din Djarin anymore, really. This is really about kind of the overall all of the Mandalorians now. I mean, and in the lead now is a Bo-Katan. So, I mean, if you compared season 1 to this, I mean, these are just 2 completely different shows practically. But that's what I kind of like about it, is because it's evolving, it's changing, and as people who watch it, there's part of you that has to kind of let go of the reins and say, all right, just take me for this ride. I'll trust you where we're going. But in all things, one thing I didn't like about Lost is is you did that, and then you weren't very satisfied with the end. But yeah, I think that there is a risk there that maybe we don't get the ending that we want. But with this episode being the second to last episode of the season, I think we're at a good point of where we want to be going into the finale, going into the next season. I kind of wish we didn't have to wait 6 episodes to get here. That if I could turn around and do all this again, I would want a little bit more of this a little earlier on. So because this is the stuff we really want to know. Some of the stuff we know we needed to see kind of Din hand over the saber to Bo-Katan. We had to kind of see the Dr. Pershing and that kind of storyline, his TED Talks. And so there's definitely a lot of things that we needed to see, but I don't know if we needed 6 episodes to do that. I think we could have done some of that in 3.
Yeah.
And then we could have been here. My biggest rub about this show is that it's only 8 episodes. So we and I think that's the expectations with everybody, because it's one of the shorter series for Star Wars. You want each episode to pack a punch. We can't necessarily say that with every episode here. And I've said it in the past, if we had like 10 episodes, maybe we would let go of some of the filler episodes and be like, it's fine, no problem. But when you only have 8 and you have one that's only like 30 minutes also in the middle of it, you kind of worry about like, oh, where are we going? And you're constantly got this anxiety and you want like things to move along. And but now I think we're at a spot now. They're like, okay, fine, we're here, and we're excited.
I think that's regrettably going to be the formula for the rest of it. Was announced Ahsoka's only 8 episodes too.
Mm-hmm.
When I heard that, I was like, oh, come on, man. I get it. I do, but at the same time, and that's not to say that any of the episodes this season were filler, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But there was just stuff. I think in every episode you could argue that building the trust between the factions of the Mandalorians, especially in like episodes like 5 and 6, is really important, even if a lot of the stuff that happens in those episodes isn't pertinent. I think you do gradually, just with the passage of time, that building of trust between the factions is something.
Yeah.
And even within the faction of, prior to the two factions coming together, Din Djarin sort of reclaiming his identity with the Children of the Watch. So, all that to say, I think this show is in a good place. At least I hope it's in a good place.
Oh, it is. I think it is.
Yeah, and moving into next week's episode, something we should also point out is RIPs for Paz Vizsla.
Wow.
What an epic way to go out. Not the most necessary death I've ever seen.
Right.
Like, I guess he could have walked on the other side of the wall and then hit the button.
Yeah.
But honorable nonetheless, the Mandalorian way. This is the way he, of course, says as he walks to his doom. And in fact, I thought the way they did it was pretty cool. The introduction of the Praetorian Guards after he takes out all the other Dark Troopers was pretty neat. I am going to miss him as a character, though. But I think that makes sense if you're a viewer. Because let me ask you, if you were to choose between Vizsla and Wolves, what's his first name? Ace?
Axe Wolves.
If you were to choose between Paz Vizsla and Axe Wolves, like which one to not have in the show, I think most people would probably choose Axe Wolves. Maybe not everybody. Maybe I'm generalizing too much.
He's a little slimy. That's all.
Yeah, he's the less likable character. Maybe that's
right.
So he flies off. We're gonna see him at some point next episode.
Right.
And we lose the more likable of the two, Paz Vizsla, at the end of this one. So shout out to Paz, sacrificing himself for the rest of the Mandalorians. What a guy. After we had a whole episode this season about rescuing his son. That was the other surprising part about that
true,
too.
Yeah.
But
yeah, when the two factions of the Mandalorians met up and they were kind of toe to toe to each other, you remember that scene?
Mm-hmm.
For some reason I thought of Beat It, the Michael Jackson video. I was waiting for them to both get the dagger out and do the dance around each other. That would have been quite a turn.
Yeah. Can you imagine they just break out in song and dance at that point? Okay, so did we miss anything on the episode that we want to talk about before we move into our rankings and ratings of this episode?
I don't think so. I mean, yeah, I think it left a lot of things that we are waiting for. We're waiting for Thrawn. We know we're waiting for Thrawn. We're waiting to see how. I mean, Din Djarin was captured, right? Is that where we're at?
Yeah, at the end of this episode, Din is captured. The rest of the Mandalorians, with Bo in charge, have fled. She still has the Darksaber. Gideon wants the Darksaber, which, by the way, the scene when he was like, return that to its rightful owner, meaning himself, I was like, I don't think either of you are the rightful owner, technically.
Watch Hoth Hangout on YouTube.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, having Din Djarin, because you always have to have that, right? That little cliffhanger at the end of the episode going into the finale.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are we going after here? So we're going after Din. That's pretty much the way. This is the way that we're trying to get to. And with Bo-Katan on the other side trying to get to him. Yeah, I'm excited how they're gonna do it. They're not gonna. I don't think you pull Luke Skywalker back into this one, and I think this is a Mandalorian only battle here. So I'm excited to see how this happens.
Yeah, I don't think we see Luke next episode.
Yeah.
I think we do see Thrawn, although I think it's going to be
Yeah.
in a minimal role, perhaps towards the very end of the episode. I don't even know if we see Luke in Mando season 4. I would kind of hope so, but all things have indicated that Mando is going to be not just a
Hmm.
4-season show, but like even 5, 6, or perhaps even
Hmm.
7 seasons. So if they start bringing Luke into it, I feel like it loses some of its value.
Yeah, yeah.
But anyways, back to the episode itself. This was my favorite episode of the season. Do I want to say my favorite episode of the show? I don't know if I can go that far just because the
Same.
Luke episode is so good at the end of season 2. But I will still grade this one an A minus. And I think a bit of my excitement for the episode was probably like Star Wars hangover from Star Wars Celebration. Just to like how excited I've been about all of that stuff going on.
Hmm.
But I truly did love this episode. There was action, the best of which of the entire season, I would say. There was meaningful storylines. There was new stuff. There was stuff for new fans. There was stuff for longtime fans from the books, the Timothy Zahn books, all sort of things they've incorporated from that in this episode. And just, bringing stuff back into the fold that they hadn't talked about almost all season. Like, sure, we talked about Gideon, but like, where is he? We got to see him.
Right.
We know Thrawn is lurking somewhere in the background, but now it seems like, the next step is for us to
Yes.
see him. We got to meet the Shadow Council, the Praetorian Guards came in, the Dark Troopers, we saw the base on Mandalore. It was just like so many things pertinent to the story happened in this episode, which is why I think it was so good. It makes me kind of want to say A, but I'll stick with my guns and say A minus.
It's funny because as you were listing it, all the things, my grade kept going a little bit, ticking up and up and up. So as you stayed firm at your A minus, I'm gonna go A,
Okay.
solid A,
Okay.
because of all of that stuff. I
Yeah.
mean, there's no need to repeat all of it. It was just it was a good, easily the best episode of the season. Like you said, I can't put it ahead of the Luke episode, but I definitely can say it's one of the best episodes of one of the best episodes of the series. So, because it gives us that cliffhanger that Din is, and I hate seeing Din away from Grogu. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. So even in Grogu with the IG-12 now, as cute as that is, you don't want him. You don't want them to be separated. So yeah, so I'm excited. I'm excited to see what the finale is going to bring, and yeah, we'll see.
It also begs the question, is season 3 of Mandalorian the first step on the path towards getting us comfortable with their separation? That way, when Din might not be a part of the main story in season, I don't want to say the main story, but might not be the central focus in seasons 4, 5, and beyond, that it feels more natural of a transition because we've had this third season where it feels like Din is slowly
Mm-hmm.
not the central point of focus all the time anymore. Something to think about. It really doesn't even feel like Grogu is, even less so
Oh
than
no,
Din.
yeah.
It's more of the Bo-Katan season, I think, as you said already. But anyways, great episode. I think the 8th and final episode is going to be, I hope, even better. I'm going to be so pumped for that one.
Yep.
You and I will be live reacting to it, and it will be available as a live reaction episode on the Hoth Hangout YouTube channel. We're pumped for that one. I think I'm more excited for this reaction than anything you or I have done together so far.
Mm-hmm.
Just
Oh yeah, absolutely.
solely because of how good this episode was.
Right.
I want to see Thrawn so badly in live action.
And I think with all the stuff that you and I have reacted to,
Mhm.
what Andor, Bad Batch, and this, right? And we knew going into Mandalorian's going to have this pedestal that we're kind of expecting it on. I'm gonna be real though. Bad Batch season finale really hit us hard though.
Yes.
As much as we expected Mandalorian to have that same type of impact, Bad Batch came out of nowhere and absolutely floored us. So Go back and watch that if you haven't yet. But yeah, we are so excited for the Mandalorian season finale. And yeah, when we react to that, yeah, it's gonna be a fun time. I got my popcorn already.
We should pop some big buckets of popcorn for next week. I certainly am incredibly excited for it. And something else that I am super ultra excited about as we perhaps switch gears here in a second. This episode we already anticipated was going to be pretty long, so it's going to be a 2-part episode, and we're going to sort of switch gears over to some of the awesome Star Wars Celebration announcements we had. So we appreciate you listening to part 1 of the this episode of the Hoth Hangout podcast.